So next we have Lori Byer is going to talk to us about staff support and trauma-informed programs. So welcome back, Lori.
Hey, thanks. So the earlier presentation was really laying out what trauma-informed care is, what the process looks like. But the most important resource that our agencies and organizations have is all of you, is the staff. And we really believe that in order for trauma-informed care to work, you also have to experience these same things. So that's why this entire presentation is about all of you, and recognizing that you are so integral to trauma-informed care, what you think, what your experience is, and then your ability to provide trauma-informed care to the patients and the clients and the families you serve comes out of that experience. If you're not experiencing it yourself, how can you give it to others? So we believe that looking at the staff and your experience, it's not a luxury, it's not an option. Your trauma-informed care work group can't decide, we're going to look at the patients and clients and their families first, and if we have time, we'll get to the staff. But if we don't have time, well, you know, that they're just an afterthought. We believe that it's essential. And also that staff support is an organizational obligation, but I also want to say to you, what I'm going to present to you this morning is also that we believe it's also a personal and professional one. That we're not going to ask you to just point fingers at the organization, but what can we do for ourselves personally? What can we do for ourselves professionally to take care of ourselves and to take care of others, to take care of your coworkers and to have that atmosphere where people are working together. And also that we know that in stress systems that trauma is often a literal and figurative reality. That sometimes we are literally in traumatic experiences and figuratively, you know, that we are experiencing vicarious traumatization, that many times the organizational stressors, not having enough resources and so on, that causes, you know, our own kind of trauma. And also what we know about trauma and recovery for the agency, it really, what we say is good for recovery for individuals who've experienced trauma. We can use those same principles when it comes to making our agencies and organizations trauma-informed. It's not just good for the people who've experienced trauma and abuse, but it's good for all of us. So again, the basic lesson, which I think I've said this, you know, kind of ad hoc, but that all staff members can create a setting of and relationships that are characterized by safety, trustworthiness, choice, collaboration, and empowerment only when they experience these same factors in the program as a whole. And it's unrealistic to expect it to be otherwise. It's unrealistic to think that you can provide trauma-informed care if you're not experiencing it too. So you don't have to answer these questions out loud, but I want you to think about, again, do you feel safe when you come to work? Do you feel physically and emotionally safe at work? Do you feel that you have coworkers that are able to be there to help you out if there is someone who's having a difficult time, if they're combative, if there are other things that cause your job sometimes not having the staffing levels that we don't feel is safe. For some of you community partners, you might be doing things in the community. Do you feel safe, physically safe when you go out into the community to make visits and so on? But also just as important is emotional safety. Do you feel like you can talk to your coworkers and supervisors and that there is a level of emotional safety there? Because sometimes we don't always have those relationships, but we need to be able to convey what it is that we're going through. If we're having difficulty with a client or a patient or a family member, to be able to express that, to be able to problem solve, and to not be seen as the problem child or the employee that can't do their job. Do we have that kind of emotional safety at work? Also, trustworthiness. Do you have those feelings that you can trust the organization, that you can trust your manager, that you know what it is that you've been asked to do? Now, I want to ask you all, what is generally for most of us the last line in our job description? What's at the bottom of it? Other duties as assigned, yes? And I think that most of us are willing to do other duties as assigned. But I think what's also important in regard to trustworthiness is, are you able to do most days what it is that you've been hired to do? And do you have trust in the organization that they have hired you to do a job that you're being asked to do? Because I think what's difficult for all of us is if we are asked to do things, to step in for people or individuals and do something that we don't have the training and education to be able to do it. And that then can cut down on our ability to feel like we can trust them. And also our safety. You know, we want to know that when we go to work today, that we're going to be asked to do what it is that we've been hired to do. The next one, choice. Do you have some choice in your job? Most of us like to have some choice about the way that we do things. Sometimes it's the people that we serve and so on. I can remember a coworker saying to me, yeah, somehow I got a reputation that I do well with angry young adolescent boys. So what did she get on her caseload? All the angry young adolescent boys. And what started out as a compliment quickly turned into, in her mind, kind of a curse. You know, we would like to have some choice. You know, if it's not going well, if you've had a bad interaction maybe with a family member or with the patient themselves, to be able to say, I'm not sure that this is a good fit. And to be able to give that feedback and to have some choice. Sometimes, and I know this isn't always possible, but we also like to have some choice, some flexibility in work hours and so on. And I know that that can be difficult if you're doing shift work, but if your daughter has a doctor's appointment and you need to leave an hour early, can you come in an hour early? Is there some choice and some flexibility? And also collaboration. As important it is that we give a seat at the table to the patients, the clients, their families, also, do you have a seat at the table? Are you being asked about your feedback? Whether it is through staff surveys, through focus groups. I would also say to you, this trauma-informed initiative, they are asking you to be part of this. They are asking for your opinion, and they're saying to you, your opinion matters. And your experiences matter, as the posters say. And take that seriously and be willing to collaborate and have your voices be heard. And empowerment. Prioritizing, do you have opportunities to get new training and education? Are you rewarded for training and education? Is there a salary increase if you get a license or a certification? Are you encouraged to do that and to explore new ways that you can become even better at what you do? And so that emphasis on empowering you and helping you to build your skills. And is that there? Is that woven into your job description and to your experience at your work? And these are all areas where we believe that when we look at staff, we have to make sure that you all are experiencing this. So I want to ask you all, would you be willing to call out your biggest stressor at work? Okay? And if it's your supervisor or coworker who's sitting next to you, you know, you can decide if you want to call out their name or not. I'll leave that up to all of you, okay? Anyone willing to get us started? What's your biggest stressor at work? Lack of time. What else are stressors at work?
Lack of support staff.
The environment, and I heard another one?
Lack of support staff.
Lack of support staff, okay? Good. What else?
Lack of training.
Lack of training. All right. Any other stressors at work? Insufficient tools. Okay. Anyone feel like they have too much paperwork? Yes? Anyone feel like there's too many initiatives? Like this one. I'll acknowledge it, okay? Anyone else have stressors at work? The complexity of the families that you're serving. Thank you. Anyone else stressors at work? Everyone else is stressed. So you're working in a stressful environment, you know, and then sometimes that traumatic environment, you know, again, that figurative and literal reality for many of you, yes? Yeah. Anyone else have stressors at work? All right, I wanted to, Sue, would you be willing to say some of them out loud? Sue is taking a list for us. And I know that Jen is trying to get it all down in the computer.
Hello? Okay, great. Name that stressor. We have lack of time. We have the environment, lack of support staff, lack of training, insufficient tools, paperwork, too many initiatives, the complexity of the families, generalized stress in the environment.
All right, I wanted to ask all of you, as you look at this list, how many of them are to do with the people that you're serving? And I think the complexity of the families, would you say that's the only one on the list? I just want to bring this up because I want to say to you all, you're not unusual in terms of when I do this exercise in trainings, I have sometimes had a list and none of it was about the people that they were serving. And yet, if you told people what you do for a living, wouldn't they all say to you, oh my gosh, that must be so difficult, working with that population and so on. And yet, what we often see as our biggest stressors are not the people that we're serving and the complex issues, their issues, their problems, their family structure, their trauma and abuse, but it's the other things around us. And my theory, and see if you all agree with me, I think we need the other things at work to go well, because what do we want to focus our time and attention on? The families, the people that we're serving. And so we need those other, that the environment not be stressful, that we have enough staff support to do what we're asked to do. Somehow we're going to add hours to the day. Or what would be even nicer is to not have quite as many responsibilities. And maybe that more staff would help us with that, right? In order to be able to focus on who we're really here to serve. And that's why I think that we find so many of these other issues so incredibly stressful, because we knew taking this job that it was going to be challenging. What we want is for everything else around it to be a bit easier so that we can focus our energy where it needs to go, and that is on the clients, the patients, the families we're serving, right? All right, I wanted to look at what we often hear from people in terms of, and you've said some of these, when the goals and demands exceed the resources, that sometimes, especially in environments where our economies are contracting, asking to do more with less, sometimes people leaving and their jobs being consolidated and the person not being, someone not being hired to replace them. Sometimes doesn't it feel like you're giving conflicting obligations or expectations? Is the obligation good patient care or is the obligation documentation? And sometimes it can feel like they can be at odds with each other. And what is the standard for success? I know that at Community Connections, our staff people have productivity requirements. So is the standard for success whether you're meeting productivity or is it that you're giving good client care? And sometimes, again, that can seem at odds with each other. For many people, that physical danger that they feel at work, not knowing if they're going to be physically safe. And we're going to talk more about emotional challenges, the vicarious traumatization, because that's real. And you also mentioned the few staff support, not having enough staff to be able to do what you're doing. So let's look at that vicarious traumatization and burnout. And I think vicarious traumatization, recognizing that what can happen to us as caregivers is that we start experiencing many of the symptoms that someone who has experienced trauma and abuse is feeling themselves. I think that anyone can get burned out. You can sell used cars and get burned out. But I think being in the human services, that we are much more susceptible to vicarious traumatization. And I would say to you that the real question for all of you, I believe, is not will you experience vicarious traumatization? But to me, the real question is how much vicarious traumatization will you experience? Will you recognize that you're experiencing it? And will you do anything about it? I want to tell you a story. I was asked about, it's probably 3 years ago now, but by an organization in Washington, D.C., and they happened to be a domestic violence organization, and they had gotten a contract from the District of Columbia Superior Court to have 6 people work at the D.C. courts every day, and what their job was to do was to help people who came in for protective orders. If someone was violent in their life and they were trying to get a judge to issue a protective order, that they would help them fill out the paperwork. So all day, that's what they did. And you can imagine how stressful that was. In order for the judge to agree to that protective order, that person would have to say the worst experiences. You know, when they were physically abused, when they were threatened, when they were thrown against the wall, whatever it was. So they would write them down, and I said, okay, so you write them down, and then you go into the courtroom with them, right? And they said, oh no, our job ends at helping them fill out the paperwork. And I said, okay, so then how do you find out if they got the protective order? And they said, well, we don't. And I said, what do you mean? Don't you have access to court records? And they said, no, we're contract employees, so we are not allowed to look at court records. So they said, what we do is we look at the Washington Post, which is our newspaper. And what were they looking for in the Washington Post? Yeah, obituaries, because we're a big enough city that even if your assaults would not make it to the newspaper. The only thing that would make it to the newspaper is if someone was murdered or killed. And they were really looking for obituaries or articles about someone who was killed. Now, wouldn't that be a terrible way to find out if the person that you were serving, what had happened? So I asked them, I said, so do you think that it's impacting you? Is it affecting your life? And one of the young women said, well, I don't think it's impacting me, but it does make me really tired. And I go home at night and I fall asleep on the couch at 7 o'clock and I wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning and go back to work. Everyone, what's that a sign of? Depression. Yeah. Another one of the young women said, well, I used to be on an ultimate frisbee league, but that got to be too much work, so I dropped off of that. What's that a sign of? Yeah, avoidance and also depression, things that you used to enjoy that no longer bring you joy or fulfillment. The third young woman said to us, well, I've been having these dreams lately, and in my dream, I'm reliving the story that it was told to me that day, but it's not happening to the person who told it to me. In my dream, it's happening to me. Now, what would you call that? Trauma. And that would be a PTSD reaction, right? And I wouldn't call that a dream. I would call that a nightmare, right? And then a fourth young woman spoke up and said, well, I don't think it's affecting me, but I know I'll never have a relationship or get married. But other than that, no big deal, right? So I had, out of the room of 6 people, I had 4 of them, which I would say were having very serious reactions to their jobs, and yet not recognizing how seriously their job was impacting their lives. So I just want to challenge all of you to try to recognize if your job is getting to you, if you're experiencing vicarious traumatization. I was doing a training, and a woman spoke up and said, my husband pulled me aside and said, honey, we've got to talk. I'm afraid of you. The kids are afraid of you. And she said to us, I wasn't upset that he said that to me, because what I came to recognize is that it was getting to me. And she said, what I think it was is that I was using up all my energy at work. And then when my kids or my husband would come to me and say, honey, can you help us? I've got this problem. Her response was, figure it out yourself. She said, I had nothing left. And that was a wake-up call to her, and she was appreciative of that wake-up call. So recognizing in yourself, in your family system, is vicarious traumatization happening to you? And then we believe that there's levels of work-related stress. Remember, the organization needs to take care of you, but we also have a professional and personal responsibility. So what are some of those organizational stressors? We've mentioned some of those, right? Budget constraints. Do you have enough leave time? And are you using it? Is it an organizational kind of culture that encourages you to take that leave time instead of continuing to bank those vacation days? Are you getting supervision? I think that too often we're told that after you've been at a job for a while, you no longer need supervision. And I'm not talking about supervision where someone's wagging their finger at you, telling you what you've done wrong, but supervision that's supportive, where you can talk about issues, whether it is a patient or a family you're dealing with, or whether it's a coworker that you don't know how to work well with them, and to be able to problem solve. Do you have the physical resources that you need? And sometimes having too many people on our caseloads. But also professionally. What are some of the professional work-related stresses that we all experience? Our own beliefs about empathy. Sometimes we're very good at being empathic when it comes to patients and clients and families. But do we have empathy for our coworkers and for ourselves? That sometimes we can adopt that idea of stoicism, that if you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. But recognizing that everyone has different resiliency levels, different abilities to cope. And are we able to have that empathy for other professionals and for ourselves? And also that idea about independence, that I should be able to do this, therefore I won't ask for help, and I will just soldier ahead and do this. And also, are we willing to get the education and consultation that we need to be the professional that we want to be? Personally, many of us have our own trauma histories. And so are we attending to that? Are we recognizing that sometimes our issues are triggered by our jobs? And by daily occurrences, they can be triggered. And do we have effective coping strategies? They're not just good for the people that we're serving, but coping strategies can help us too. We all have stressors in our current lives, don't we? I had a coworker, this was probably 5 years ago now, but she received a diagnosis of breast cancer. And at the time, her daughters were 2 years old and 4 years old. And I can remember she would go for radiation and she would come into work and work a full day. And I couldn't imagine what it was like for her to be dealing with that personal stressor, not knowing if she was going to be around to watch her daughters grow up and continue to be there for the people that we were serving. So whether it's a divorce, whether it's your own medical issues, other changes in your life, all of those personal stressors come to bear in our work, don't they? So if we have these different stressors, organizationally, professionally, personally, we also have to have a multi-level response to stress. So I have some slides coming up where we want to look at, what can organizations do? What can we do personally and also professionally to take care of ourselves? There's also some information. The American Psychological Association has actually done quite a bit of research about psychologically healthy workplaces. They actually have a tab on their website. And what they have found out is that what employees report is that they want to be involved. They want to be empowered and for organizations to collaborate with them. So I want to encourage you all, take a stake in your work. Be willing to become involved and hopefully become involved in the Trauma-Informed Care Initiative. I want to ask all of you, do you have a work-life balance? Do you have that ability? I think I heard a couple of no's, maybe a couple of yeses, but sometimes it can be hard. Someone said, work-life balance, does that mean you have your personal cell phone in one pocket and your work one in the other? Is that work-life balance? No, that wasn't exactly what I was thinking of. I want to tell you a story from one of the trainings I did. It was from an organization, and they were a residential program for children and adolescents with emotional and behavioral issues. And this woman who told us this story, she was a supervisor for one of the cottages. They had 4 cottages in the program where the kids lived, and they could be there for up to a year. If there was a crisis in one of the cottages, it was mandated that she be called at home on the cell phone. She said, I remember it was a winter's night, it was cold, I had just snuggled into bed, gotten all warm, I think I had just fallen off to sleep, and don't you know, the cell phone went off. She answered it, and the residential counselor on duty said, and I'll make up a name, John got really upset tonight. He had a crisis, but he's calmed down now. He's in his room. I think he might have even fallen asleep. She said, that's great. But what was the crisis? Well, we had to deny him his snack tonight. And she said, okay, why did you have to deny him his snack? Well, because his chart said that he was allergic to seafood. And she thought, that's weird. It's not like they're sending over lobster rolls for, snack, It's usually like a bag of pretzels, right? And so she said, well, what was the snack tonight that you had to deny him? Has anyone figured it out? Goldfish crackers. So the staff person actually thought that they had chopped up goldfish to put in the goldfish crackers. What do you think John, the adolescent, was telling the staff person? You're crazy. I've eaten goldfish crackers all my life. I know that I'm not allergic to goldfish crackers, and they do not have goldfish in them, and yet, he was denied his snack because of it. I just, stories like that you just can't make up, right? Employee growth and development. Do you have the opportunities, again, to get education and training so that you can become the employee that you want to be, to have the skills? Health and safety. We had worked with Truman Medical Center in Kansas City. And I want to ask all of you, do you have separate vacation and sick leave, or is it PTO? It's separate, okay? Because this only really works if it's separate. But what Truman Medical Center said to their employees was, if you have unused sick hours, we will allow you to turn them in for health benefits. So they could get like a membership to a gym, a Weight Watchers membership. They could even apply for money if they wanted to get a treadmill for their home. Now, I'm not saying that they would get the entire amount to pay for the treadmill. That would have to be a lot of sick hours, right? But they could get money toward that. And I thought that was a really cool idea. It isn't just saying that we want you to be healthy, but we're saying we're going to reward you because you have been healthy. And so we would like to say to you, if you want to cash in some of those sick hours, you can do that. And we really want to support that. Employee recognition. It's really nice to hear that you're doing a good job and to have that recognition. And so ways to do that, whether it's Employee of the Month. One place did something, they called it the Snoozer Cruise Award. And every team once a month got to choose one person who had done exceptional service that month. And the snoozer cruise meant you could snooze, come in an hour late, or you could cruise and leave an hour early. So it wasn't a huge benefit, but it was something the organization could do. And it made a lot of difference to the employees when their team voted them for the Snoozer Cruise Award. And it was something that they had a lot of fun, administering and doing in their organization. So how about looking at this slide and the toxic versus the healthy work cultures? And I think that too many of us have experienced those things on the left side of the slide, yes? Where people don't help each other, human needs are ignored, people feel alienated or dehumanized, cliques are common. It's like that bad high school cafeteria experience, where only certain people could sit at certain tables and so on. So that's obviously what we don't want. But look at the positive things. When workers know what is expected of them, when you go to work knowing what it is that you'll be asked to do that day, when you have the resources to be able to do your job, and also, this is my favorite, do you have a daily opportunity to do what you do best? And ask yourself that. We spend a lot of our lives at work, don't we? Don't you want to be able to use your talents and your gifts at work? And do you have that daily opportunity? I also want to say to all of you who are supervisors, are you looking at the people you're supervising? And are you giving them daily opportunities to do what they do best? To be able to use those gifts and talents so that they can maximize what their gifts are and that they can really show that to the entire organization. And then organizationally, what have we found that helps? Again, having that supervision, consultation, case discussion. If there is an unusual incident, do you take time to be able to talk about it, to discuss it? What went right? What didn't go so well? How can we improve it? Again, having adequate time off for staff. This is very important. And to give staff the message that we value you. You know, sometimes our salaries are not quite as high, but can we have benefits that reflect that the organization really does want us to take care of ourselves? Being offered that education and training so we can get those new skills, those desired skills. And I mentioned before about discussing and debriefing about client and work-related stressors, having that variety. Again, most of us don't like to do the same thing every day. One person once said to me, my dad told me that the reason that he worked in a factory for 40 years and put rivets on a mechanical part every day was so that I didn't have to. And most of us want to be able to have variety, right? We don't want to have to put the rivet on the same car part every day. And so how can we have that variety in work tasks and responsibilities? And again, important to have mental health benefits. And also, I would say to you, knowing how people, it's astounding to me when I ask people, do you have employee assistance programs? And they say yes, but over half of the audience doesn't know how to access them. So also knowing how you can access if you would like to use that resource. It's not a resource unless we know how to access it. So familiarizing yourself, if you're a supervisor, making sure that the people you supervise know how to access mental health benefits. Also, what can we do professionally? Remember, we're not just going to point our fingers at the organization, but we're also going to help ourselves professionally and personally. Can you understand what you need, what your work needs are? You know, whether it's that I need a 10-minute break during my shift. I can't just go full tilt the whole time. I need to be able to, one person said, I need to walk outside one time during the day. You know, I can't be inside the entire day. I need to have that opportunity to clear my head to see that there's something else out there. But understanding what your work needs are. I bet many of you would say, I need supportive coworkers. I need to be able to work as a team. But what are those things that make you successful? And then how can you maximize that? How can your team maximize that? Taking time off from work. Again, sometimes I know, certainly in my job, sometimes it felt like if I took a vacation, there was always so much to do before the vacation and afterwards that it felt harder to even do it. And so getting over that feeling that it's harder to take a vacation and really use that time off. Finding education and training, and really training that applies to you, and making sure, you know, some of us have to get continuing education units, and getting those really in areas that are going to help us to be better at what we do. Sometimes we're the person who's canceling supervision. So I want to encourage you that if you're canceling it, that you're rescheduling it. And some of us canceled it 2 years ago, and we've never rescheduled it. So really encouraging you to do that. And also identifying your strengths, the clients and families you're working with. And I would also add to that line, your coworker strengths. You know, it's important to recognize that I'm not the only one intelligent here, and I'm not the only one who's a hard worker. But recognizing that we're really a team, and we're a pretty talented team, can be very helpful. Accepting that there is stress and strain in your job, I think that's a reality. And sometimes just knowing that it's going to be, it can be helpful to us, some baseline stress and strain. Do you have a sense of humor? Yes? Do you encourage it at work? Do you find ways, you know, to go into the employee kitchen, whatever it is, talk to your coworker and use that sense of humor in order to be able to help you out, in order to be able to be the professional that you want to be? Also, do you know what helps you on a daily basis? Do you pace yourself? Do you take breaks when possible? One person in a training told me, my coworker, actually it was her office mate, said, do you realize that about 2:30 in the afternoon you get pretty surly? How would that be if your office mate said that to you? Some of us might not appreciate that, right? But she said, I was glad my office mate said it to me. And she said what it was for her is that she always planned to pack a lunch. But she had 3, children under, I think, 3rd grade. And she said, I never had time. I packed their lunch, but I never had time to pack mine. So then she would tell herself, well, I'm just going to, go out and grab something to eat, and I'll do it that way. Did she have time to do that? No. And so about 2:30 in the afternoon, her stomach was grumbling. She had a headache by then, and she said, my office mate was right. I was pretty surly. And so she had to recognize that she needed to figure out what she had to have during the day to make her as effective as possible. Talk to someone else and someone who's helpful. Have you ever gone in and talked to someone, a coworker, and you come out feeling worse about your job than when you went in? So isn't it nice to talk to someone who's helpful, not someone who's more negative than you are? And so finding that helpful someone, and also develop your own list of self-soothing strategies. What works for you, at work? One of my coworkers down the hall, and she's a therapist, and she has one of those fountains that runs water. Now, for me, that would just make me go to the bathroom all day. But I think for her, she finds that very helpful, and I think her clients do too. But what works for you? What helps you get through the day? Whether it's breathing, relaxation, being able to take 5 minutes to do some meditation. Maybe it's positive self-talk that you find reassuring. And monitoring your reactions to the day, whether or not you're stressed out, whether you're hungry, whether or not you're sleepy. Sometimes just being able to recognize that. And sometimes asking for assistance. I don't think I'm the person today to handle this crisis. I don't have it in me. And being willing to say that because you know that you're just not 100%. And also encouraging you to not only be looking after yourself, but can we also help out our coworkers, to help each other, and accepting that stress and related feelings are legitimate for yourself and for everyone else. That you're not the only one who is stressed out, and to recognize that and to act on that. Expressing support and finding supportive others. Are we part of you remember that old saying, are you part of the problem, or are you part of the solution? And I think that all of us would like to be part of the solution. So are we promoting solutions, not just complaining? Are we the person who always complains, and then if someone offers a solution, we say, well, yes, but it's not going to work. So how can we change our focus so that we can be problem solvers? And do we contribute to the cohesion of our work group? My mom used to say to us that, you never want to say behind someone's back something that you're not willing to say to their face, right? And are we using that principle at work? Are we willing to say something to our coworkers, to our supervisors, and try to engage in constructive problem solving and not just say it behind their back? So striving for that open and direct communication. And framing problems and solutions as group issues, not just as an individual one. What I mean by that, have you ever found yourself saying, maybe about a coworker, well, Alicia really has a problem with the way we do intake. I don't, but she does. So what are we really saying about Alicia? She's a problem, maybe underlying it kind of, she's not very smart or she's not very capable. Rather, if she's having a problem, it's very possible that she's the only one who's saying it. So let's see it as a group issue and let's do some problem solving. That if it's a problem for that person, it's maybe a problem for all of us. And so we're going to look at it collectively. Personally, what helps you? And I think what's important is be honest about your exposure to emotionally stressful material. Be honest about, are you experiencing vicarious traumatization? Not feeling like you have to be so stoic and that you have to just suck it up, but recognizing when things are difficult, when you're having a physical response to it, an emotional response. I thought that slide that Holly had earlier about the physical, emotional, the spiritual, that trauma impacts impacts us in so many ways. Are we attending to our inner experience? You know, many of us benefit from our own therapy. Many of us are trauma survivors ourselves. So are we attending to that? And therapy can be very helpful. Building in transition times between work and home. At Community Connections, we used to have 2 different buildings, and we consolidated to 1 building. And I literally have a coworker, Kevin, who lives across the street from me. Kevin used to work in the other building, but then was moved over into the main building. And so I sent Kevin an email, and I said, would you like to carpool together? Didn't hear back from him, sent him a voicemail, would you like to carpool? Well, I didn't hear back from him a second time. Well, then one day I was walking my dog, and I saw his wife walking their dog in the neighborhood. And I said to Lynn, you know, I was wondering, I kind of reached out to Kevin about carpooling, and I hadn't heard back. And not surprisingly when I think about it, but what Lynn said to me was, you know, I think that Kevin really sees his transition time between home and work as important. Kevin at that time had 3 kids under 12 years old. He's a supervisor for a team where he supervises 9 people who are doing community support and so on. And what was the only time that Kevin had to himself? In the car, right? And what would Kevin and I have talked about in the car? Work. And Kevin didn't want to talk about work until he got to work. Doesn't that make a lot of sense? And so, you know, do we see those transition times as important times to be able to decompress? I remember being at a training and someone told me they had an 1.5-hour commute to work. And I said to them, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And they said, oh, you don't need to be. It's my favorite time of day. And they said, I get books on tape and I'm listening to the book and I chill out. He said, I've almost gotten to the point where if there's an accident, I think, all right. I'm stuck in the backup, you know, but I can hear another chapter in the book. But building in those transition times. You know, we talk with people who have experienced trauma about self-soothing, coping skills. And I think that those skills aren't just good for the person who's experienced trauma, but can we use those skills? When we talk about, with trauma survivors, yoga and meditation and deep breathing, and figuring out ways that help us to comfort us, whether it's taking a walk, cooking. What is it that you do that helps you to feel good about yourself? And recognizing that those coping strategies aren't just good for people who've experienced trauma, but they work just as well for all of us. And again, having fun, making sure that you're spontaneous, that we spend a lot of time laughing. And most of us benefit from that personal life, having that balanced life, trying to get that balance between home and work. And also a spiritual life, that for many of us, that makes us complete, having that spiritual balance in our lives also. So in conclusion, you know, what I would like you to take away from this presentation is recognizing that trauma-informed care, it doesn't mean just focusing on the patients, the clients, the families you work with. It includes all parts of the constituencies, all parts of the program. And remembering, again, you are the most important resource. So we have to focus on you. That staff support and care are key elements in trauma-informed care. They're not an afterthought. They're not a luxury. And also recognizing that there are 3 kinds of stresses in our lives: organizationally, professionally, and personally. And we have to have assistance in all of those areas. Organizations need to respond, but we also need to respond professionally and personally and be willing to take care of ourselves. And I really put that out there as a challenge to all of you, to really think about, what am I going to do? I once said to someone, you know, I think the important thing about taking care of and self-care is to recognize that whenever we take on a new stressor in our lives, we also have to increase the way that we take care of ourselves. And a woman in the training said, great, another thing for my to-do list. You know, like it's not long enough already. And I'm not saying that I want to make your to-do list longer, but I do want you to put yourself up toward the top of it and to recognize, remember that old saying, if mom's not happy, no one's happy? What I want to say to you is if you're not healthy, no one else will be healthy. And that the health needs to start with you and to make yourself a priority. Thank you, everyone.